podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Because every situation is unique, you should consult with a qualified legal professional for advice specific to your circumstances. If you need legal guidance, please reach out to an accredited attorney or contact us to schedule a consultation. Hello, and welcome back to the Veteran Benefits Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Deming. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that our clients ask us about all the time. We actually got some really good questions on one of these episodes about writing buddy letters, lay statements, personal statements, whatever you call it. We're going to dive into that topic today and try to give you guys some practical tools on how to write them, how to approach your friends and fellow service members and family members about them, whether to write them yourself, what to include, what not to include, all of that stuff. So I have some notes here to keep myself hopefully from going down too many rabbit holes. But if I touch on something and you guys need more information, if you have questions, if it triggers more questions, please feel free to pop those in the comments section to the show. We will do our best to get back to you, and it might trigger us to do another episode on something that, if it's something you're asking questions about, I'm sure there's other veterans asking the same questions. So today we are going to address questions like, do I need a personal statement? What's the difference between a buddy letter and my own statement? Should I combine conditions or separate them into separate letters? What makes a statement persuasive? And what mistakes hurt credibility? So first of all, what is a lay statement? VA calls them lay statements. They're evidence that help prove a piece of your claim. So it's important to understand, and we've done episodes in the past on what pieces or what elements you need to prove a claim for VA disability benefits, but just to kind of highlight that here, because it's going to help you understand what you're asking for when you're asking somebody to write a lay letter or you're writing one for yourself. So you need to show that something happened in service. It could be exposure to a toxin. It could be an accident in service. It could be repetitive use injuries. It could be that an injury or disability began during service, but you need to show that something happened in service. You need to show that you have a current diagnosed disability. If you don't have a diagnosis, sometimes if you show lay statements showing symptoms, VA will take that as enough evidence and they'll schedule you for a compensation and pension exam to confirm or rule out a diagnosis. But it's usually helpful to you need to have a current disability, whether it's been diagnosed by medical professionals or you're demonstrating it now. And there needs to be a connection between the two. And then once you have disabilities, how severe, how frequently they are, the symptoms flare up, what you're experiencing, those pieces all need to be documented, because if you go to a CMP exam, the examiner is only getting a snapshot of what they see on the day that you're in the exam. So those statements are really helpful to paint the full picture of your history of disability, which can sometimes help connect it back to service, if it's been continuously painful or continuously causing symptoms in service, and how severe it is now. Do you meet the criteria for 30%, for 70%? What are your symptoms now? That's going to help VA determine what to rate you. So when you're asking somebody to write a statement for you, you need to understand that you're trying to get them to give evidence to VA that speaks to one of those pieces of your claim. So who can write lay statements? It can be basically anybody who has personally witnessed something. So it could be somebody that you served with, if you're trying to show what happened in service. So if somebody was there with you when your bunker got bombed, having them write that statement can help show that actually happened in service, when your vehicle rolled over, and nobody went to sick call because mission came first. Those pieces can help fill the gaps from your service treatment records, from your military personnel records. So somebody that you served with can write about something that happened in service. We sometimes get friends and family members who maybe they weren't there with you when the incident happened, but they can speak to the before and after. So you left for deployment, happy-go-lucky, you came back and they noticed these symptoms, limping, depressed mood, easily agitated, whatever, whether it's mental health or physical condition, they can speak to the before and after if they knew you before and after an incident. That can kind of help anchor stuff to a timeline of when did the symptoms start. So lay statements are not automatically less important than medical evidence. They fill that gap. And so VA is looking at, do all the pieces kind of fit together? Do they tell a coherent story? Are there discrepancies between lay statement? Somebody says, oh yeah, he definitely injured his knee in Iraq. And the other person says, oh, he definitely injured his knee in a training incident in Fort Huachuca. Okay, well, those don't align. And so VA is going to look for credibility gaps in there to kind of figure out which ones align. But if you've got multiple people telling pieces of the story from different angles or their own perspectives, that can be really helpful. So we want people to talk about what they saw, what they heard, the symptoms that they've witnessed, limitations, behavioral changes, chronology. Like I said, before the incident or before the deployment, the veteran was like this. After the deployment, I noticed that. So it could be clergy member, it could be a family member. There's really nobody who can't speak to what they saw. I mean, we wouldn't want minor children to speak to stuff. We want them to be 18 so they're competent to sign a sworn statement saying that what they say is true. But they can speak to what they saw. Now, your lay witnesses, unless your family member or friend happens to be a doctor or a medic, they're not the ones that are going to be writing the medical conclusion that says this happened in service and therefore that caused my condition. But they're painting the picture so that it makes it easier for the medical experts to come in and piece those pieces together and show that there's a connection and show that you have a diagnosis, that you've had this diagnosis or you've had the symptoms that support diagnosis for this amount of time and that it's related back to service. So when people are describing symptoms that they've observed, the more detailed and specific they can be, the better. It is not very helpful for them to kind of regurgitate the rating code. So I've seen people, they think that they're doing the extra work and going and saying, oh, I know that VA rates migraines based on the frequency of severely prostrating and prolonged migraine attacks that are productive of severe economic inadaptability. I don't know how many of your friends speak like that. My friends don't speak like that. When the VA raters see that, they know that whoever wrote that is pretty much just copying language from the rating schedule. They want to see personalized, detailed statements. So not so-and-so had migraine headaches this often, but we were supposed to go on a family vacation and the veteran had to opt out of a lot of the activities because he or she was in bed for this amount of time because of migraines, and it seemed like we went out and got over-the-counter medications, but it didn't seem to work. And it was 2 days at a time that their coworker writing something similar. Like a lot of times I have to cover down on so-and-so's job duties because they're calling out sick because of migraines. I see them on their desk with their head in their hands. Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're witnessing, that's helpful. If it's sleep apnea, unless a doctor has already diagnosed somebody with sleep apnea, it's, somebody who's been sharing a room with you. So a roommate, a significant other. And we wouldn't want them to say, I witnessed symptoms of sleep apnea in 1997, unless they're qualified as a respiratory specialist. What qualifies them to say it was sleep apnea? But they can say, when there was loud snoring, I witnessed the veteran waking up gasping for air. I witnessed the veteran stop breathing for so many seconds at a time and then suddenly gasp for air. Things that a layperson can observe, and they may not know the tools, they may not know how to diagnose it. Even if you can find the diagnosis on ChatGPT, you are not, unless you are a medical professional, you have to remember that your lay witness statements are not designed to replace medical statements. They're designed to give a list of symptoms or a history about what happened or about the condition that they've seen. So some people call them personal statements, some people call them lay statements, some people call them buddy statements. There's really not a legal definition or a legal distinction between the different kinds of statements. I think generally we refer to buddy statements as people who served with you. They're your battle buddies can write statements. But sometimes we'll call it a buddy statement if it's somebody who's witnessed your headaches recently. It's a lay statement. It's a statement from a non-medical expert describing the symptoms that they've seen or the incident that happened. So a lay statement or a personal statement can also be written by the veteran themselves. VA will look at it through the lens, they know that you're kind of self-interested, you're trying to prove your case, but that doesn't automatically mean that you're lying. And so they'll look at your statement and see if it corresponds with the rest of your service records, with the rest of the statements that are in your file, with your medical records. And if stuff lines up, they are required to give it credibility. So if you say, I started having headaches on this date, I can anchor it to these things. I went to get headache medication at sick bay, that's in the records. If things kind of align, then VA needs to give those lay statements, those personal statements, credibility. Even though you're self-interested, they can't just assume that you're lying. Now, if you are lying, they have some ways to kind of ferret that out and find discrepancies in what you're saying. If you say such and such happened, and they know that if that happened, there would be a report in the record, and there wasn't one. Those are things that we'll sometimes work around, like, why wasn't it documented? And if there's a valid reason, we want to explain that valid reason. I didn't go to sick bay because my unit needed me. We didn't have extra personnel. I was afraid of being labeled sick bay commando. I was afraid of letting my unit down. Whatever the reasons are, we want to document those. And so those are really good coming from the person who didn't go to sick bay when something happened, because you're the one that can give the most testimony. You can also get your friends, buddies to write statements, about the command culture and explain why there might be gaps in medical records. You can talk about the treatment that you've received, if the treatment worked. I do like if there's a symptom log available, it can be really helpful to document those. So there's apps like Migraine Buddy app, My Pain app, I think is one. And so you can kind of document stuff and get a history for at least several months to show how bad, how frequently, what types of symptoms, when they occur, what they might be linked to. And that can really help the medical professionals connect the dots to say, yeah, this was likely related to service or likely related secondary to another service-connected condition. There's certain things that only you, the veteran, would know and your friends and family might not know. You can describe your pain, but you're the only one that can feel your own pain. Bloating, certain symptoms, nightmares, anxiety, dizziness. Somebody might see you stumble, but you're the one that feels the dizziness. You can feel when it comes on, how severe it is, that you have to sit down. So there's certain things that have to be explained from the veteran's perspective. Now, you can do that in a CMP exam or to your doctor and hope that the doctor writes down everything you're saying. But sometimes having those lay statements that are signed and sworn, especially if they're on the form that VA prescribes for a lay statement, can really help fill in gaps. Because if you're talking to the CMP examiner and they don't write down everything you say, it's not going to make it in the record. So sometimes getting those statements in your own words can be really helpful. Okay, so should you write one statement for all of your conditions or several statements, one for each condition? I'm going to give the lawyer answer. There is no one size fits all. There is no right answer, wrong answer. VA doesn't have a standardized way that they prefer it, but I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about the rating process and how the raters are going to review it to understand which one is going to be most likely to help your claim. So you are trying to get the rating officer, who often overworked, has a lot of files to get through. I know they're using AI more, but which can help them not miss stuff, assuming that the AI is working appropriately, but you want to make it as easy for them to find the relevant evidence as possible. So if you're going to write one statement for multiple conditions, you definitely want to kind of bullet point it or put in headers and be like, okay, this is the part about migraines. This is the part about stomach. This is the part about feet. If all of the conditions relate to a single injury, you might want to write one statement about that injury and list the orthopedic conditions that resulted from your parachute malfunctioning, the hard landing, the MRAP rollover. Then you wouldn't want to do if it all relates to that one injury, that one incident, you wouldn't want to write separate statements necessarily because it all ties back to the same underlying condition. But you do want to think through, there's a chance that VA would grant some of those conditions and deny other conditions. And so once, let's say your headaches and your respiratory condition are granted and you're still fighting VA for your knees. It could be helpful to have a single statement that just talks about your knees, because if knees are buried in the middle of a statement about headaches and respiratory condition, it's easier for that rating officer to overlook it. Again, VA's started to use AI more, and so I'm hoping that some of those oversights and missed evidence is going to become fewer and fewer. But it's helpful to kind of think about it when I'm gathering my evidence, when I'm pulling my evidence together, what's going to be the easiest way for somebody to process it and be like, yep, that makes sense. That ties to this condition. I can find the evidence that I need. And they are looking at them usually one by one. So they're going to look at all of the evidence related for your knee. They're going to look at all of the evidence related for your shoulder, all of the evidence related for your respiratory condition. And so if it's kind of separated out, at least with headers, that often makes it easier for the rating officer to find the evidence and associate it with that claim and then grant the condition if the evidence supports service connection. One of the factors, so If you're writing them yourself, you can go through that analysis and kind of figure out the best way to slice it. If you've got 29 conditions, do you want to write 29 separate statements? It depends on, I'd probably lump them into which ones are related to certain incidents, which ones are related to certain body systems. So if you injure your back and you also have nerve pain that goes down both legs from the back injury, that's really all stemming from the same injury. You'd want to keep that in one statement. You don't want people to have to go looking for the part about the nerve pain separate from the part about the back pain. That should really all be rated together, and keeping those together is going to be really helpful. But again, if you're filing for 29 claims and 15 get granted, and you're fighting on 15 that got denied, and VA has to keep sorting through one long statement that addresses all of the ones that are already granted before they can find the pieces that are relevant to the claims that were denied, that could pose challenges. It could lead to stuff getting overlooked. So that's what we're really looking for is, once it's in the record, VA has a duty to address it and consider it, and that is VA's duty. But you want to put your best foot forward, and are there ways you can organize the evidence in a way that's going to make it easy for a rating officer to do their job and easily grant your condition? Now, when you're getting buddy letters or lay statements from friends and family, it depends. Sometimes I've had veteran clients try to locate people they served with on Facebook, but they haven't really talked to them in 10 years, and they're asking a favor. And so at that point, getting one statement that addresses everything you want it to address is going to be way better than no statements, because you're asking them, well, I need a separate one for my knees, and I need a separate one for when you heard me snoring, and I need a separate one for when we got back and you witnessed my mental decline. So when you're asking people to do you favors, I don't recommend that you write the letter for them, because you do want them to be in the person's own voice. So, VA kind of looks at that and they're like, okay, it's all in the same font. It's all written in the same voice. And that can be a marker of fraud. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is fraud. Sometimes you have a conversation, you're like, listen, I'll type it up. You make what changes you want to make, but I'm kind of getting the ball rolling for you. But the more it can be in their words, the more authentic it sounds, the more unique details they can add, the more credible it's going to be. And so VA is looking at markers of credibility. So is the person competent to address the symptoms? So, if you've got a buddy who's saying, yep, I saw this rollover and that definitely caused the degenerative disc disease in my friend. Well, unless they're a medical professional, they're not competent to address that. So that's competency. They are competent to address what they saw. They can address the rollover. They can address the fact that you went to sick bay or didn't go to sick bay. They can address the fact that they saw you with ice packs after the fact, but they're not the one to be giving medical advice. So competency is, what are they competent to testify about? And then there's credibility. And credibility is, how believable are they? Again, that comes down to, are they just copying and pasting out of the rating code? Are they adding personalized detail? Is the personalized detail that they're adding, does that correlate or correspond to something that's already in your record? If you've got 3 different lay statements that all kind of basically tell the same story from different points of view, that's going to add to the credibility, because you've got all of these people saying that they saw basically the same thing. It's going to add to credibility. If the person is somebody that you knew once and you don't see them very often, and you're trying to get them to write a statement about your current symptoms, they're not competent to write about symptoms if you're not in contact with them in the present. If you're not currently seeing them or haven't seen them in a long time, and they're writing about your current symptoms, that's not something they're competent to write about, because they haven't seen it or heard it or experienced it with you. And if they do write about it anyway, then it's not really credible, because, okay, so how do you know this stuff just because the veteran told you? It lacks both competency and credibility. So VA is looking for both of those. Okay, so what makes a strong lay statement? One of the pieces that makes a strong lay statement is having a clear chronology. So writing out clearly how you know the veteran, when you first started witnessing stuff, tying that to other things that would anchor your statement. So it's less credible to say, I remember clearly that these symptoms first began in April of 2012. It's more credible to say something like, I remember it was April of 2012 because that was my niece's quinceañera and I couldn't stand up, I couldn't dance because my knees were hurting. And so that was the first time that it really manifested. And I know that was April of 2010 because that's when she turned 15. So anchoring it to something, anchoring it to a birth of a child, anchoring it to a historical event, that helps establish a credible timeline, a competent and credible timeline for when the symptoms happened and when they kind of progressed. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I really want to hammer home specificity. So not just my knees hurt, but I can't kneel to garden for more than 5 minutes. Instead of saying I have anxiety, I stopped grocery shopping because I panic in crowded stores. So whatever is true to you, I mean, the statements I'm giving are not ones that you want to copy and paste if they're not true to you, but you want to kind of give those details that align with the rating code. It's helpful to read the rating code and kind of understand how VA rates things, but you don't want to copy and paste symptoms out of the rating schedule. You want to have nuanced details, personalized details that relate to your situation, or if you're asking somebody else to write a letter for you, that relate to, you're asking them to write about details that relate back to your situation. Now, you want to talk about frequency, especially if you're trying to establish either chronicity, that something's been going on since service, or that it meets the rating schedule for a higher rating. How frequently is it occurring? And how do you know how frequently it's occurring? Again, anchoring it to something like, I know I get headaches at least 3 times a month because I've had to call out from, looking back at my work papers, I can see that I've missed work at least 2 days a month. And I know that some of my headaches happened on weekends. So if you can anchor it to something that, not just, I feel like it was about 3 to 4 times a month, that's not as helpful as saying why it was that frequent. You want to talk about functional impact. So VA will give, for certain orthopedic conditions, they'll give a minimum compensable rating, meaning if you have painful motion, you'll get a 10% rating on something, even if you don't have limited range of motion or other functional impairment. The pain alone is enough to get 10%. But on most of the conditions, VA is not just looking for, they're not looking for lab results for the most part. And they're not looking for the pain scale on a scale of 1 to 10 or how bad it was. They're looking for how it impacts your ability to function. So is it forcing you to call out from work? Is it forcing you to miss family events? Is it impacting your sleep, impacting your ability to drive, impacting your ability to lift or squat or carry groceries or concentrate? And again, for each of those kinds of things, the more specific examples you can give, the more credible it is, because it ties back, it can be verified. Other people can say, yeah, I saw the person, so-and-so doesn't sleep at night. I see them getting up. If they're someone who shares a house or a bedroom with you, they can comment on your insomnia because it's something that they see and how frequently it happens. So the impact, and not just frequency of how often it happens, but are you awake because of your back pain? Are you awake because of your tinnitus? What's the functional impact for the condition that you're having? So some of the common mistakes that people make when writing lay statements. I know I've given a lot of details about stuff that you want to include in there, but keep in mind that VA doesn't want to read a novel. So kind of threading that needle of having enough detail that it's adding credibility and competency to your statements, but not so much detail that somebody's got to sort through 12 pages of your life history to find the details that they need to assign a rating or establish whether something was service connected. So you don't want it to be too long. Medical jargon, again, if you're not a qualified doctor, you want to keep the statements to stuff that a lay person would observe. So my head hurts a lot, not I have completely prostrating migraines. You want to avoid guessing. It's not your job. It's not whether it's you or the buddy or family member who's writing the lay statement for you. It's not your job to guess what the cause is, even if it seems pretty obvious. Even if you banged your knee and now you've got patellofemoral pain syndrome in your knee and lateral instability in your knee, and you guess that your current pain is from that time that you banged your knee in service, you and I can, without a medical degree, we can pretty much assume that that's probably what caused it. That's not our role. Our role is to say, I banged it in service. It has continuously hurt since service, and let the medical expert finish that, connecting those dots, and say, and therefore it's service connected. You don't want to copy internet templates. We don't want all of the lay statements to look alike. You don't want to send out a template letter to all of your buddies and have them just fill in 1 or 2 sentences and then sign it and have them all look alike. That's going to decrease the credibility of those statements. And by decreasing the credibility, it's going to decrease the amount of weight that VA gives to it. And so if they get a CMP exam that contradicts those statements or doesn't really give them a lot of weight, VA is going to say, yeah, we
we considered them, but we didn't give them much weight. And that's the job of the rating officers, to weigh the conflicting evidence and assign a disability rating and service connection or not service connection for something. So you do want them to be individualized. You don't want to exaggerate your symptoms. You want to be very specific. A lot of times I have to encourage veterans to not downplay their symptoms, because we learn to deal with pain. We learn to deal with symptoms. You don't want to downplay it and say, well, it's fine, I muscle through it, it's fine, because that's what VA is going to write down, and you're not going to get the rating you deserve. But at the same time, you don't want to exaggerate your symptoms. You don't want to say everything is 10 out of 10. That's going to trigger VA to think that you're malingering. Malingering is a medical term for people who make up symptoms or invent disabilities or illnesses in order to get benefits or get something out of it. And so you don't want to be seen as malingering. You want to be honest with your level of symptom. VA is looking more and more at whether something's credible, whether there's contradictory evidence. So you don't want to exaggerate your symptoms. You don't want to leave out embarrassing details. So a lot of the stuff that people are filing for could be seen as embarrassing, but VA rates urinary incontinence based on the number of times. One of the ways that they rate it is based on the number of times you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, the number of times you have to go to the bathroom during the day, or the number of times you have to change an absorbent pad. You need to be comfortable talking. If you're experiencing that, you need to be comfortable putting that down on paper. Erectile dysfunction gets rated as special monthly compensation. And so that's a separate monthly amount of money that's above and beyond whatever your other disability ratings are. So avoiding talking about that one because it's embarrassing is just really shooting yourself in the foot if it's something that you're experiencing and you think it ties back to either service directly or secondary to one of your other conditions. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, they're looking at sphincter incontinence, inability. Basically, they're looking at frequency and symptoms of diarrhea, constipation, those kind of things that a lot of people don't want to talk about. With mental health stuff, we often see people shy away from talking about symptoms. I think part of it, if you're not used to talking about your own symptoms, it's hard to put words to what you're going through. And I think a lot of people normalize what they're going through. But you don't want to downplay symptoms, especially just because they're embarrassing, even if it involves suicidal thoughts, even if you don't have intent to do it. A lot of people don't want to talk about that. They're afraid of being labeled as incompetent or having it impact other rights. And we've had other episodes that talk about that piece of it. But you do want to kind of honestly and fairly describe all of the symptoms that you're experiencing. Corroboration is important. So people often ask, like, are 3 statements better than 1 statement? They are if they corroborate each other, if they kind of fit into the same story, if they're credible and competent to talk about what they're talking about. There is no magic number, though. If you can only find one buddy who is there, that's all you've got, that's fine. If you can find multiple people to kind of talk about the symptom or the event from different angles, that can really help. There's other ways to corroborate stuff. If you've got employment records that show that you're missing work and you're talking about having to miss work because of your symptoms, that can really help. Medical records can help. You're talking about the symptoms. If you also have documentation that shows that you sought treatment for it and you're getting medicated for it, that can help corroborate your symptom, your lay statements about the symptoms at home. So those go hand in hand. It's helpful to have all of those pieces. VA is looking at all of that to determine a kind of holistic picture of if the evidence supports service connection, if the evidence supports a certain rating level. So the purpose of a lay statement isn't to tell the VA everything that's ever happened to you. It's to give the VA the facts that only you or the people who know you best can provide. The best statements are organized, specific, honest, and focused on firsthand observations. They help the decision maker understand not just what your diagnosis is, but what it's like to live with that diagnosis every day. So as you're working on a strategy to develop those statements, you want to think about what is it that you're trying to prove? What piece of the pie might be missing? If you're trying to say something happened in service and you didn't go to sick bay for it, really developing statements around why you didn't go and what happened that substantiate an in-service occurrence or an in-service event is going to be really, really helpful. If you're trying to get a higher rating for something, understanding how VA rates that and making sure that your lay statements document symptoms that align with, but don't just copy and paste the criteria in the rating schedule is going to be really helpful. So I hope that kind of triggered some thought in you. I hope that was helpful. If you have questions, please put them in the comment section. in this episode. We'll do our best to get answers to you. And if you have requests for other topics for us to cover, please let me know. And we will see you next time.